You need to start covering all the rent if you want this to work. She said it like it was a scheduling detail, not a line she just crossed. Standing in our kitchen, arms folded, already done with the conversation before it really started. We'd been living together for a little over 2 years in a one-bedroom apartment we both signed for. Same lease, same rent, same agreement from day one. We split everything down the middle because that's what made sense for where we were. That sentence wasn't frustration. It was a decision she'd already made without me. She followed it up immediately. She said her job was stagnating, that she was reevaluating priorities, and that it was time I stepped up if I wanted us to move forward. Forward in her mind meant I pay, she figures herself out. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue the numbers. I asked one question. Since when is this my responsibility? She shrugged, not defensively, casually, like the answer was obvious and I was being difficult for not accepting it. She said couples support each other. She said I made more money, which was technically true, but not dramatically. She said she was tired of feeling stressed about bills. Then she said something that stuck. If you really cared, this wouldn't even be a discussion. That was the moment it stopped being about money. There had been signs before. Not huge red flags, just small shifts. She'd stopped transferring her half on time. First it was a few days late, then a week. Then she'd Venmo part of it with a sorry attached. Groceries slowly became my turn more often than not. When utilities went up, she'd say we should just put it on yours for now. Each time I let it slide. I didn't want to nickel and dime someone I lived with. I figured things evened out over time. What I didn't realize was that she'd already decided the balance was permanent. I told her I wasn't agreeing to that, not because I couldn't technically afford it, but because that wasn't what we agreed to, and changing it unilaterally wasn't okay. She rolled her eyes. That sound, that exact movement, told me more than anything else. She said I was being transactional. She said she didn't feel safe depending on someone who kept score. She said maybe we weren't as aligned as she thought. Then she dropped the real pressure. If this is how you're going to be, maybe I should rethink living here. It wasn't said as a threat. It was said as leverage. She knew the lease. She knew moving would be expensive. She knew I liked the apartment and the location. She was testing whether I'd cave to avoid disruption. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there leaning against the counter, watching how comfortable she looked pushing this onto me. She filled the silence by repeating herself, slower this time, like I hadn't understood the first time. You cover rent, I handle my stuff, we reassess later. Later was undefined. Later was never. I asked her if she'd already decided this before the conversation. She didn't deny it. She said she'd been thinking about it for months, that this was her boundary, that if I couldn't meet it, she needed to protect herself. That word, boundary, it was the cleanest reversal I'd ever heard. I told her I needed some time to think. She nodded like that was reasonable, then went back to scrolling on her phone, already done with me. That night she went to bed like nothing had happened. I stayed on the couch, staring at the dark TV screen, replaying not her words but her certainty. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a preview. I checked the lease on my phone even though I already knew it by heart. Both names, joint responsibility, no clause about one person suddenly becoming the provider. I thought about how easy it had been for her to decide what I owed her, how little concern she had for whether I agreed. By morning, the problem wasn't whether I could afford the rent, it was whether I was willing to accept the role she'd assigned me without asking. I left for work before she woke up. On the train, I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. When someone shows you how they plan to use you, the only real choice is whether you stay in position. I already knew I wasn't going to. When I got home that evening, she acted normal. Not tense, not cautious. Normal in a way that assumed the decision had already settled in her favor. She asked what I wanted for dinner. She mentioned a show we'd been watching. She didn't bring up the rent again, like it was already handled. That told me everything. I brought it up instead. I said I'd thought about what she asked and that I wasn't agreeing to it. She didn't look surprised. She looked annoyed, like I was dragging out something obvious. She said I was missing the point, that this wasn't about fairness, it was about partnership, that sometimes one person carries more weight, that she'd do the same for me. I asked when, not hypothetically. When exactly had she ever done that? She didn't answer directly. She said relationships aren't spreadsheets. She said I was being rigid. She said my tone was making her uncomfortable. Then she escalated. She said if I wasn't willing to support her now, she needed to reconsider our future. Not dramatically, calmly, like she was explaining a policy change. I realized she wasn't threatening to leave. She was threatening to stay while resenting me unless I complied. I told her I wasn't comfortable being put in that position, that changing our financial agreement without discussion wasn't okay, that using the relationship as leverage wasn't okay either. She sighed loudly, sat down on the couch and said I was making this bigger than it needed to be. Then she said it. Well, if you can't step up, I don't know why I should keep splitting space with you. That was it. Not anger, not panic, just entitlement, said plainly. I asked her what she expected to happen if I said no. She said she hadn't thought that far ahead. She assumed I'd come around. That assumption was the line. I told her I wasn't going to cover the rent for both of us. I also told her I wasn't going to argue about it anymore. She laughed once, short and sharp, like I was bluffing. So what? You're just going to leave? She asked. I said no, not immediately. I said we needed to talk about the lease. That's when her posture changed. She stopped leaning back, sat up straighter. I reminded her we were both on it, that neither of us could just decide new terms, that if she didn't want to split rent anymore, we needed to discuss next steps like adults. She said she couldn't afford to move right now. She said that wasn't fair. She said I was putting her in a corner. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her of anything. I told her I wasn't responsible for solving a problem she created by changing the rules. She accused me of abandoning her, of choosing money over us, of not caring about her stress. I told her I cared enough not to agree to something that would poison the rest of the relationship. She went quiet after that, stared at the wall, then said something I didn't expect. If you're not going to help me, then I need some time to figure things out. Maybe you should stay somewhere else for a bit. It was said carefully, framed like a compromise, like she was doing me a favor. I asked if she was asking me to leave the apartment I paid half for. She said she just needed space, that it would be temporary, that it would show good faith. I told her no. I told her if anyone was stepping back, it would be her. Not because I was kicking her out, but because she was the one who changed the deal and then tried to push me out of my own home. She looked at me like I'd slapped her. She said I couldn't do that. I reminded her that legally, neither of us could do anything unilaterally. That's when the conversation ended, not with resolution, but with distance. She packed a bag that night and went to stay with a friend. She said it was just for a few days. She said we'd talk when emotions cooled down. I didn't stop her. The next morning I emailed the landlord. Neutral tone. Simple question about options if one tenant wanted to vacate early. By the end of the day I had my answer. We could either find a replacement together or one of us could formally remove ourselves with written notice and financial responsibility for the remainder. I forwarded the email to her. No commentary. An hour later she called. Not angry, panicked. She said she didn't realize it would work like that. She said she thought I'd just cover things until she figured it out. I told her I wasn't changing my position. By the end of that week, she hadn't moved back in, and the rent, due in 5 days, still had her name on it. Final update. She didn't pay her half of the rent. I did. My half on time, exactly as always. I kept the receipt. I forwarded it to the landlord without commentary. 2 days later, he emailed both of us. Polite, firm, late balance noted, fees outlined, payment required from the remaining tenant listed on the account. She called me again after that, crying this time. Not hysterical, but tight, controlled panic. She said her friend's couch wasn't working out. She said she didn't expect things to escalate this fast. She said she just needed a little more time. I told her I wasn't changing anything. I wasn't kicking her while she was down. I was also not covering her obligations. She said she felt blindsided. I reminded her she was the one who set the condition. The landlord followed up 3 days later with a formal notice. Still neutral, still procedural, still very real. She asked if I could just front it and she'd pay me back later. I said no, not angrily, just clearly. That was the last financial conversation we had. She tried to pivot after that. Said maybe she could move back in and we'd reset. Said she overreacted. Said she didn't mean it the way it came out. I told her the problem wasn't how it came out. It was that it came out at all. She asked if this was really worth ending things over. I said it already had. Over the next 2 weeks, the consequences stacked up without me touching anything. Late fees hit. Her credit took the mark. The landlord pushed for resolution. She scrambled between friends and short-term rentals, each one more expensive than the last. She asked if I was enjoying this. I said no, and I meant it. I wasn't watching, I wasn't tracking, I was just not intervening. Eventually, she asked to be removed from the lease. The process required written notice and a final settlement of her balance. She paid it, not all at once, but enough to close it out and get her name off. The apartment went quiet after that. Her things were gone. The extra mug in the cabinet, the shoes by the door, the background tension I hadn't realized I'd been living with. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel victorious. I felt unburdened. We didn't meet again in person. She sent one last message saying she never thought I'd let it go this far. I didn't reply. Some people think walking away is passive, that if you're not actively punishing someone, you're losing. I learned the opposite. When someone decides what you owe them without your consent, the cleanest response is to remove yourself from the role entirely. No speeches, no drama, no rescue, just absence. That was the final consequence.